Personal shit gone. Okay, so this is one of those things that in the Lonely Planet guide, you know what the Lonely Planet guides are? These little guidebooks that you get when you go to foreign places. So in the Lonely Planet guide to Ireland, on the very first page, this is one of the very first things that you see. Visitors are also advised not to take offence at the Irish propensity to swear like sailors. Many Irish unconsciously pepper their speech with curse words which are intended only to be emphatic. I curse a lot. A huge amount. And I curse in ways that will not only offend you, but might make you want to run to the toilet and vomit. And that's, you know, I would apologise for that, but apologising implies that you're going to do something about it, and I'm not. This is the way I am and the way I speak. So I hope I don't offend anybody too much. If I do, suck it up. It's you know, it's the word that we do. I don't mean it as anything other than the way I speak. It's like when I say fuck, it's like you say Yanni. So we live with this, yes? Okay, right. There's a number of things that I'm going to talk about, and one of them is going to be control issues of control and lack of control, issues of who's allowed to say what and who isn't allowed to say what. Have any of you seen this? This is the curatorsofsweden.com. Have any of you seen it? Some of you have. The Swedes among you, I would be surprised if you haven't seen it, but for everybody else, maybe, maybe not. Okay, so there is an official Sweden Twitter account at Sweden. It is the official Swedish Twitter account. It was at one stage registered by the Foreign Ministry. It's run by the Swedish Institute, have a number of inputs into it. And this is branding of Sweden. So this is like the official Sweden thing. It would be like, you know, at Yemen or at Lebanon or whatever by the Foreign Ministry. Right? So if you have a branding of a country, then you need to be on message, yes? You can't just say anything about your country. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So, what the Swedes did was that they said that the best way to be on message, the best way to control how people see what Sweden is to not control how people see what Sweden is. So that every week, a new person, a random person, not quite random, I mean, we can explain that there is a certain amount of unrandomness involved in it, but in principle, a random person gets to be the Twitter voice of Sweden for a week. They can say anything they want to say, anything, as long as it doesn't break the law. That's the only criteria that's there. It doesn't break the law. And that's a really strange concept to think about, because one of the very first ones, one of the first tweets by one of the first people who did it, who was a young journalist, was, Sweden is an incredibly racist society. The structural racism here is unbelievable. And so that started a whole discussion around that sort of thing. The next week there was all sorts of different people. Now, I give you these presentations. I'll put them up onto the Facebook account, and so you can click on all of these links to get to see them. But there was all sorts of people. So there was chicken farmers. This guy was very popular. He was a sheep farmer, and for some reason everybody loved this guy. I think it was because he posted loads of pictures of sheep, and everybody loves fucking sheep. Some people love fucking sheep, but that's a different thing. Everybody loved sheep, and so there was all these pictures of sheep, and everyone was very happy about it. There was a woman priest who was one of them, and you know, so there was all sorts of discussions. And everybody was reasonably happy with this because there was a reasonable amount of discussion around it until about a month ago. And a month ago, the new voice of Sweden came, and one of the first tweets from the new @Sweden accounts was, I don't get what this Jew thing is. You know, what's this thing about the Jews? Why is it? And there was uproar. Jews.
Yahoo.
And so there was uproar, so there was all sorts of things, so there was some little tweets, and we can find the tweets and you can have a look at them because everything is archived. And there was uproar. So we had the Zionist lobby who was in saying that this is anti-Semitic. We had people saying, how can you say these sorts of things? There was, you can imagine, a huge discussion around that. So if you're the Swedish Foreign Ministry, and suddenly you have this huge discussion around around this sort of thing, with these sorts of discussions, what do you do? What do you think that the normal reaction would be if you've got that sort of really?
The normal reaction? We'll cancel the whole program.
We'll cancel the whole program. And so what the Swedes did was that they didn't. They said that, well, the situation is this. We said that you can say anything you want as long as it doesn't break the law. This doesn't break the law, she can say whatever the fuck she wants. We don't like what she's saying, but she can say whatever she is. This is, I think, something that when it comes to issues of control, and when it comes to issues of branding, when it comes to issues of transparency, this is something that's worth thinking about. Now, I'm not saying that you could, should, or would do this in your own countries, but I am saying that one of the things that you might want to think about is how would this apply to your NGOs? How does this apply to your own organizations? If you say within your own organizations that we are for transparency, we are for freedom of speech, we are for whatever it happens to be, and somebody within your organization then says something like this, what is your reaction to that? How do you think that you could, should, or would react to that? Now, I'm not saying that you should do any of these things. I'm putting these things up for you to think about over the next 3 weeks. And to think about also when you do your projects. When you're starting to do your projects, one of the things you're going to have to think about is how do we publicize our project? How do we make our project known to the rest of the world? What sort of conversations do we want to get involved with between our project and everybody else out there? And also, how much of the way we create our project do we want other people to be able to see? Because if we demand transparency from donor organizations, for example, might it not be reasonable that we apply the same levels of transparency to our own programs, to our own NGOs, to our own... Now, I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't do this, and I do understand that there's a number of cultural, social, political, safety contexts. I mean, sometimes your NGOs, you don't even want people to know who's involved in them for people's own safety. I understand that all of these issues exist, but I am saying that one of the things that we need to think about is transparency within our own organizations, as well as demanding transparency and accountability from other organizations. That we should try and apply those same things to ourselves. It might be a funny thing for you to do, to go in and have a look at the @Sweden account. Most of the stuff is in English, so it's easily understood. Some of it is, some of it isn't, but again, the link will be there. So, the next thing I want to talk about is what we call things. And what we call things is important. The names that we give to things, the way we describe things, the words we use, have a huge power for how people understand what those things are. And so where we are now is that we're talking about digital stuff, yes? Would you agree? That we're going to talk about, you know, and you can see all sorts of discussions around digital. We can see that people are talking about the digital marketing, for example. People are talking about the digital democracy. People are talking about all this stuff. So what I'd like you to do is, I want you to, each one of you on your own, for only a minute, not more than that, write down what digital means to you. So when we talk about digital society, when we talk about digital communications, when we talk about digital whatever the fuck it happens to be, I want you to write down for yourselves now what you think digital is for you. So you have a minute or so. Okay, most of you seem to have finished, more or less.
No.
So, somebody want to give their definitions?
Mine is three. Digital means the ability to share easily with everyone.
Okay, the ability to share easily with everybody. Okay,
I said the same, I tweeted as well, sharing.
sharing. Okay, sharing. So digital is sharing.
Communication.
Sorry,
Communicating.
communicating. Digital is communicating. So sharing, communicating.
Here and now.
Here and now. Okay, digital is here and now.
Probably photos, sounds, and interaction.
Photos,
Sounds.
sounds, interaction.
Voice for silenced people.
Voice for silenced people.
Fluid and without bounds.
Fluid and without boundaries.
Untouchable information.
Untouchable information.
Our other identity.
Our other identity.
Real-time sharing.
Real-time sharing.
Universal?
Universal.
The easiest and cheapest tool to know about the world.
A tool to know about the world.
Well, I connected with speed of information.
Speed of information.
Easier to understand logic and more approaching.
Easy to understand logic.
What's
Anything else?
happening now?
What's happening now?
An elite platform for opportunities.
An elite platform for opportunities. Anything else?
Technology.
Technology. You were saying?
Better environment we create because ours was not.
Once again?
Better environment we create because.
Better environment that we create. Okay. Parallel environment that we create because ours is not enough. Interesting.
Data system.
Sorry?
Data system.
A data system. Yes, interesting.
Virtual life.
Virtual life. Yep.
I just added monopoly.
Monopoly.
A new order.
A new order. Okay.
World.
A new world. Sorry. Yes, a new world. Okay.
Easy life.
Love. Life. Is life.
Easy كمان.
Yeah.
Easy.
Is it life?
Easy.
Easy life.
Easy life.
Okay. Yes.
And we
okay.
can say
Interesting.
lazy life.
Yeah, yeah. Easy life. You?
New age, new era.
New age, new era. Anyone else? Can you see a pattern here?
A little sort of,
Sorry?
a little sort of big brother.
Sort of a big brother? Yeah. Can you see a pattern here?
Huh?
A pattern? Because I can't. I can't. For some of you, it is a new tool. For some of you, it is life. For some of you, it's a philosophical change in the way the world is organized. For some of you, it's a new channel to be able to reach people. And I think that the problem, one of the problems that we have with using, I think the word digital itself is problematic. I don't like the word digital. I don't like to use the word digital because I think it in many ways what happens is that we all sit in a room, we talk about how we're going to develop a digital strategy or whatever, but for some of us that's changing the way communication is done throughout society. For others it's a technical issue of ones and zeros. For others it's an emotional thing about a new life. For others it's a philosophical thing about our second identity or whatever it happens to be. And the problem becomes that because we don't talk from the same point of departure, we talk about lots of different things and it becomes very difficult for us to actually know what it is that we're talking about. And the result almost always is that we talk about tools. That we end up talking about Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest or Instagram or whatever. And that for me is a huge problem because when we concentrate on the tools, then we miss the context. And when we start our discussions from the tools, we try to force the context to suit the tool rather than try and force the tool to suit the context. And so the words that we use have implications. So if you think about the way that you use the word digital, and then try and not use that word, but think about the word network instead. And every time you would say digital strategy or digital communications or digital whatever the fuck. Try and change that for network instead. So if you, instead of thinking about digital strategies, think about network strategies. Instead of thinking about a digital world, think about a network world. Instead of thinking about digital organizations, think about network organizations. And see if that changes the way we think about what it is that we want to do. And I think that it will, and I think that it could. And the word network for me is going to be one of the most important words throughout the next 3 weeks. And the ability to think about networks not just as small things that we have together, but to be an actual organizational principle for the world that we live in is one of those things that I'm going to push for more and more. Now, again, remember, you don't have to agree with what I say, and that this is just the first of a long series of discussions. So for me, networking is this. It is the ability to search for, synthesize, interact with, and disseminate relationships, information, or data. Do you understand the words?
Disseminate.
Disseminate is spread, is to be able to spread information.
The third one?
Interact, synthesize. This one, to synthesize is to be able to get lots of different things put together and to be able to use them as one thing, to be able to see the wholeness. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Remember, there's no shame in not knowing stuff. There is huge shame in pretending you know shit you don't know. That will come back and bite us all in the arse. Okay, so the ability to be able to search for, to synthesize, interact with, and disseminate relationships, information, and data. And the problem here with the word digital very often is that it tends not to have this part of it into it, relationships, but it tends to have this part of it a lot more. So there'll be those different things. I would also say that networking, and this gets back to the stuff that we were talking about yesterday and the stuff that we were talking about this morning, networking involves understanding different social and cultural contexts. And this is going to be also one of those things that's really important. Because if you want to involve and engage yourself in a discussion with other people or other networks, then you need to understand their social and cultural context before you can even start to have a conversation. Now, understanding social and cultural context is not agreeing with social and cultural contexts. So agreeing with is something different, but understanding what their point of departure in their particular network is going to be one of those things that will allow us to start a conversation with people. I mean, it's like language. That if you walk into a room and people are speaking Arabic and you start to speak English and nobody understands you, you're not going to have a conversation. So you need to understand that context to be able to go in, and then you can start to have a conversation, which will lead to disagreements, it will lead to all sorts of things. So it's not agreements, but understanding. And that's, again, one of those things that we're going to have to do more and more of, because we're going to involve ourselves with lots and lots of different networks. And we're going to have to engage with lots of different networks, and so we will need to be able to do that. Now, networks can be aggregators, filters, and curators, sometimes at the same time, sometimes differently. Do you understand the difference between aggregators, filters, and curators?
No.
No. Okay, so aggregators. What's an aggregator?
Collectors.
Collectors. So an aggregator is collecting all of the information that there is about a particular thing. Filters?
Screening, purifying, something.
Yeah, so it's being, filters is from all of the stuff that you've collected that you can look at, you can pull different things forward, you can pull different things back. And curation? Curation is looking at all of the information that you've collected and being able to pull out of that groups of information that you think can be useful right now together, and to be able to show those to people. So if you think about an art gallery or a museum is an aggregator and in some case a robber of cultural artifacts. So you go out and you collect all of the stuff that you can about something. Filters is then when you catalogue things, you decide how things belong together and which things should be put on which shelves and how they should be done. And curation is when you want to show an exhibition. From all of the paintings that you have, you choose a number of paintings that you think belong together and you show them. So do you understand those three differences? And that's what networks allow us to be able to do with information and relationships. They'll allow us to do all of these different things. Sometimes all three at the same time, sometimes a combination of one or the other. And over the course of the next 3 weeks, we're going to work a lot with being able to develop networks that will allow us to do these things, and looking at some tools that will technically allow us to do these things easier or more difficultly in some cases, but tools that we'll be able to work at. I won't be looking at tools at all today. I will tomorrow be looking at tools. Okay. So, one of the things that I think is happening around the world, now I think the world is in the process of change. I think the world is globally in the process of change, structurally. I'm not talking socially, I'm talking about structures of change. And one of the things that I think is starting to happen is the networking of knowledge. That knowledge is changing in how it is constructed. So, I think that one of the first things is that networks are starting to connect us to us. They are allowing us to connect ourselves to other us's. And one of the problems that we very often have is that we look on the world as us and them. And one of the things that we need to try and do is to not so much look at us and them, but to try and look at us and us. So that there are other us's in different respects and not other thems. Now, that's not always possible to do, it's not always right to do, but as a general principle, it's one of the things that we need to start to do a lot more. And so, you know what they say, the smartest person, some people will want to be the smartest person in the room. If you feel that you're the smartest person in the room, you should probably find another room. Because if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably not going to learn a lot from that. But in general, the room is going to be smarter than any individual within it. Yes? That doesn't mean that each of us cannot know more about specific things, because of course we do. But it means that our collective knowledge together is almost always more useful, is always more than our individual knowledge on our own. And the thing that has happened, so I mean, if you look at that's what these 3 weeks for this group are going to be about. You're going to find, you've already found, that the conversations that you have out there have given you more insight and more knowledge than any of the shit that we're saying to you here. And that's going to be the way it is. Of course it is. That's absolutely going to be the way it is. The real benefit, the reason the YLVP programs are successful is not because of us, the people who stand here and talk at you. It's because of you, the people who create the networks, and because of your ability to be able to hook into the other YLVPs as well. That's another one of those things that we'll talk more about, that you have a group here. But the thing here is that this group itself is more smart than anybody in it. But it's not the smartest group in the world. Really. I can guarantee you that it's not the smartest group in the world. What then happens is that in exactly the same way as the group is more intelligent than any individual, when we connect our group to lots of other groups, then we collect networks that become much more intelligent than any of the individual groups within that network. Do you understand what I mean here? And so that's what we're doing when we do this. By bringing in other people to this conversation, we're making this conversation smarter. Hopefully. Not necessarily. I'll get to that in a minute, but hopefully. And by being able to put our information up here, we're also helping to make other nodes in the network. Does everybody understand what nodes means?
Yeah.
Everybody? Yes? Okay. So we're creating other nodes in the network that make the network smarter as well. And so the smartest person in the room is the room itself, not any individual person in it. And the network is smarter than the room. Okay. If we look at the way knowledge has been created traditionally, we have a system of reduction. Knowledge has been created in a reductionist way. We have a shitload of stuff that people know. We then have to decide what of that stuff gets put onto paper. And once we put that stuff onto paper, the stuff that goes onto the paper becomes knowledge, and the stuff that isn't on the paper becomes what?
Ideas?
Not important.
It becomes less important. It becomes folklore. It becomes magic. It becomes oral culture, but it doesn't become knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't knowledge, but it doesn't become knowledge, because we have been traditionally shown that paper, the stuff that we put on paper is knowledge, and the stuff all around it is not knowledge. It can be useful, but it's not knowledge. And so that's a reductionist principle. We're continuously looking at the amount of stuff that there is and reducing it to fit onto paper, and that reduces then the knowledge that's there, because that then gets spread around to other people around the world, or whatever it happens to be. Networks, however, work the other way. Networks are not reductionist, they are expansionist. There is no need to reduce the amount of knowledge, because you don't need to fit it into any particular thing. Networks can contain as much knowledge as there actually is in the world. And so we're starting to see a shift from a reductionist model of knowledge to an expansionist model of knowledge. And that's going to have implications for how we develop structures and how society develops as it goes along. I mean, if you think about the knowing by reducing, libraries are knowing by reducing. All of the books that there are in the world, we have to pare them down to the ones that deserve to be in the library. Encyclopedias, the same thing there. An encyclopedia is all the knowledge that's around, and then some group of men, always men, decide what ones should be, what bits of knowledge are most important. They get put into the encyclopedia, and that's where we go to see if things are true or not. How do we check our facts? We go to the encyclopedia, because that is knowledge. That's the printed stuff. That's the journals in the academic world, my ex-world. Again, this is what happens. Lots and lots of stuff is talked about. Some stuff gets printed in journals, and that becomes knowledge. The rest of the stuff, not so much. Knowing by including, however, is different. Because now every draft of every idea is available to us. There's no need for us to throw stuff away. There's no need for us, the stuff that gets printed in the journals, all of the other stuff that didn't get printed in the journals is also there. And so this, again, is a shift in what will be important, because we get to facts in a minute, but, you know, I mean, when things change, and things do change, all the stuff we've thrown away, we have to try and recreate, we have to try and re-find again, because it wasn't in the printed stuff that was there. Whereas in network knowledge creation, everything is there all the time, and it is increasingly expanding. And this is going to have, this is going to have implications for everything that we do. We have facts versus networked facts. So, what's a fact? Can anyone tell me what a fact is? I don't believe in facts. Anyone else? Scientific.
Reality.
Reality.
It's a relatively proven situation.
A relatively proven situation. Anyone else?
Something can be proven by either observation or trial and error.
Okay, something that can be proven by either observation or trial and error. Yes. Anyone else?
There are types of facts, social facts and hard facts.
So, but what's a fact?
Fact is,
I'm not asking that there's what kinds of them there are. What is a fact?
fact is what is agreed on by people to be truth.
What is agreed on by people to be true? Right.
Not an individual opinion.
Not an individual opinion. There's I mean, these are, I'm not saying I know. I'm asking you what you think facts are. And facts are the sorts of things that we want, aren't they? I mean, we talk about, oh, we have to have facts in this discussion. You know, we can't base this discussion on what we feel or what we think. We have to have the facts. And that can be really interesting to think about. What the fuck are the facts of this? I mean, it was a fact that the world was flat, was it not? I mean, for a long time it was a fact that the world was flat. Was the world flat? No. Facts in themselves are, I'm not saying that I have the answer to this, and there's a whole postmodern discussion about the relativity of truth and all that sort of shit. And people say that, you know, and we could go into a huge fucking discussion around those things, which I'm not going to do. And people will say that, there are scientific facts. For example, if you jump from gravity is a fact, and you can test it. And anyone who doesn't believe that gravity is a fact can stand on the top of a tall building and jump off. And we will see whether that is a fact or not a fact. And people say that, and this shows that there are some facts. And I would say that that will be absolutely true until the next development in quantum mechanics, where it will show that in certain spheres of nanobiological systems that maybe gravity doesn't exist. That maybe gravity is different within those spheres. And what does that mean for our fact that gravity exists? So I'm saying that the word fact is problematic, but we've had facts. We've been able to go and look at the facts that there are. We've been able to go to the encyclopedia and look at the description of something and say whatever it is, and these have been generally accepted things. But we now have network facts, and network facts are slightly different, because if facts were printed tables of data, which is what they very often were, then what we now have is that we have network facts which are linked data. And that's something very different. Because what we're now doing is that instead of just looking at the printed table of data that's there, we're now able to look at the context of those printed tables of data. We're able to look at all of the different interpretations of those printed tables of data. We're able to look at all of the different discussions that there were about those printed tables of data. And suddenly, a fact that a car emits X amount of coal dioxide as it moves becomes slightly different when we then start to look at the environmental context of what that fact means, when we then start to look at the social context of what a society based on automobiles means. And so we're moving into it, and this is much more messy. This world that we're moving into, this network-based systems, are much more messy than the ones that we've had before. They're less rigid, and they're going to demand more of us, and that can be problematic. So our task for today, for the rest of this program, and I would say for the rest of our lives, but you don't need to particularly agree with that, but our task is to build smarter rooms, to make smarter networks, because bad networks make us stupider. But, so I'm not saying that this network world that we're moving into is going to be a solution to all our problems, and that because everybody is talking to everybody else that we're going to be much smarter. If you put 50 stupid fuckers into a room, they are going to come out even stupider. If you know, I mean, and depending on your social, political, whatever it is, context, I would say that if you only look at Fox News, it's going to make you incredibly stupider. That is but I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that from my filter of, my point of departure, that would be true. Other people will say other things. But so my point here is not that networks are going to make us smarter. My point here is that networks are becoming the base unit of communication, and that our task is to create networks that will make us smarter. Because there will be networks that will make us stupider. Yep. And that this world is a much messier world than the world we've been in before. That it's going to be a more difficult world than the world we've been in before, a less certain world than the world we've been in before, but it's a world that's on its way in.
So, I agree, but don't some, lot of the networks you really don't build, you find yourself.
Sure.
Usually networks are not really that white, black, I'm going to build this network, I'm going to damage
Absolutely.
I didn't hear the question.
It wasn't a question, but the statement was that there aren't some networks we don't build, we just find ourselves in. And that's absolutely true. But once we find ourselves in those networks, we can then try and build them to be smarter. We can then work within those networks to try and make them smarter, or we can leave those networks if we think they're making us stupider and find other networks. to be able to do. But we can't navigate that system unless we understand the actual network system itself as a base.
Yeah. Actually, I have two questions. The first one is about, let's assume the whole situation is like this. We have the traditional source of information that you mentioned, like the encyclopedia or the rest of the things, and we have like the evolved source of information, which is networks. Don't you think that the second source is somehow based on the first one? Because let's say like let's take this room as an example. And we are talking about I don't know, the global crisis thing. All of the knowledge that we will put in this room, it's based on the things that we took from the books, from the encyclopedias, no. So don't you think it's somehow dependent, the new knowledge on the old knowledge? This is my first question.
Yes, and I would say yes, that's a reasonable assumption, yes.
Yeah, and my second question is, don't you think that as much as this world is going more complicated and more harder to live in and to get information in, this will lead to, at a certain point, for the whole situation to collapse, and the whole situation will go like lots and lots of years backward, so for more simplicity, not complexity.
That's it. Those are interesting thoughts, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss them as we go along. You can ask, I would ask you to ask questions as soon as they pop up into your head. So don't be afraid to ask questions. You know what they say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. We all know that's not true, don't we? I mean, there are some questions that are just so fucking stupid, you're thinking, But we ask our questions anyway and see where we end up. But so ask your questions, and some of them I will answer, some of them I just don't know the answer to, and some of them I'll just ignore because we're going to get to them further on. But you can also, I mean, this is, at the moment I'm talking at you, and will be until such time as you start to talk back. There's a responsibility, I have a responsibility to leave space for you to be able to speak, but you have a responsibility to actually speak in that space that's there. So those things we're going to look at as we move along, very useful points. You had
Yeah, but I know the question will be answered. I was going to ask a stupid question, how we can make it smarter.
How we can make it smarter is a really interesting question. And again, it will be a contextual answer, because what's smarter? Who decides what a smarter network is? Who decides what's right and what's wrong? And so all of these things we're going to have to look at over the next 3 weeks, because they'll be important philosophical decisions and discussions that we need to have. But so what I'm trying to do now is sketch the parameters, and then we'll fill those points in as we move along.
Yeah, I have just like a remark, and you can answer later if you.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's about what you've said before. It's about encyclopedia books and stuff, and the knowledge. Yeah. So what I'm trying to understand is if the problematic that you share with us, it's about where is the real knowledge, or if it's the knowledge of encyclopedia doesn't work anymore, or because I do believe that scientists and facts of scientists facts, or it's a very hard work. And I do believe in the importance of encyclopedia and books, especially because they have a very big importance, and I think that the knowledge there are more available, or can steal more than the knowledge in the network, because it can be controlled, it can be deleted, it can be a lot of things. So I don't know if I'm confused.
Well, again, these are interesting questions. I mean, in that one I would say that if we take the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is the one I know more, as an example. Mm-hmm. You know the Encyclopedia Britannica?
Yeah.
The Encyclopedia Britannica, does anyone know when it was last updated? When the printed edition was last updated?
Was last updated.
Updated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Updated.
Updated.
Okay, okay.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
You know, if there's words that I use that you don't understand, somebody just say what it is in Arabic.
No, you meant updated.
Yeah.
I heard.
So anyone guess what
As
this
a
updated
theory.
was?
It's Irish accent.
It's my Irish accent.
Yeah.
This is true. I mean, even people who speak English don't understand me sometimes, and it gets worse as I go on. It was updated 15 years ago. Right? Has anything happened in the last 15 years that maybe needs to be changed? Of course it does. And the problem with the printed book is that you can't update it because it's too expensive, it takes too long. The Encyclopedia Britannica will never be printed again. They have, the Encyclopedia Britannica 3 years ago took a decision that they were never going to come out in a printed version again. Because they can't afford it, it's too expensive. To update stuff, the information gets put out of date too quickly.
So you can print it, but it's going to be online.
And so they will never be printed again. But they will, so that the entire Encyclopedia Britannica is now a network. It's entirely online.
But in virtual life, can the information, the note can disappear very quickly.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so hold that thought about the virtual life. I'll be getting to the virtual life in a little while. Okay, so, but again, very interesting points, and we will discuss them as we move along. So, there are different sorts of networks. Of course, there's internal and external networks, and external networks we've talked a bit about, but there's also internal networks. And your internal networks, we're going to have to look at being able to make your internal networks transparent for the people within them is going to be an important issue for us in the way we work. And you need to have thoughtful, self-aware and tolerant people. Now that is a utopia in many ways, of course, but within your own organizations we can help each other to be more thoughtful, more self-aware, more tolerant by being transparent. And this is what you were saying this morning, which I thought was really interesting. I'm really bad at names, so I'm talking to you, yes. Which was that we are maybe not as honest in our groups as we would think that we are or that we would like to be. And it takes a while for us to get trust within our organizations to be honest with each other. Of course it does. But to be able to build networks that have transparency, that have thoughtful, self-aware people in them, allows for also criticism. And this is important because if we are thoughtful and self-aware, then we're able to be critical without being hurtful. We're able to understand the difference between individuals and ideas. We're able to try and approach ideas rather than attack individuals. And so if we can make our organizations, our networks in this way, and already be thinking about them, well, that's a good way to go forward. One of the things, a very simple thing, how many of you use Kindles or use e-books in any way? How many of you know what it does? Does anyone not know what things like Kindles do? So it's electronic books. On all of your iPhones, there's a little app. You can download the Kindle app to your iPhones, and it allows you to read any books or any PDFs, or in fact any digitalized document. You can read them on your phone. You can read them on whatever, and that's quite useful. But what's much more useful here is that you know that you can make annotations on your book, so that if you're reading a document on your phone, you can know, the yellow markers that we use on the document, you can use exactly the same thing on your ebook, so that you can mark specific parts of the document. Now, that's useful for you, but what becomes when we now start to think about networks, what becomes even more useful is that everybody else that you want to can also see what you have annotated within that document. So one of the things that, for example, in organizations, one of the things that I find really useful is that if you have documents that you want to put out there, so everybody gets access to the document, everybody reads the document on their ebook, on their Kindle, on their iPhone, on whatever it is that they want to, and you can do it on your computer as well. you can then go and look at how many people, what were the most highlighted parts of this document. So if all of you within this room read the same document, you all highlight them, we can then go in and we can look at the collective highlighting. So we can see, oh, okay, these passages were much more highlighted than any other passages in the document. Do you understand what I'm talking about here, everybody?
Yes.
And so what that means is that there's a really useful way for us to be able to see within our network what people thought was most important in this document and what nobody thought was important in this document. And then to be able to go in and say, okay, nobody seems to have thought that these things around these social issues were important, but everybody seems to think that these things around these social issues were important. And that allows us then to surface a discussion around whether these things are or aren't important, or whether it's the way we've described them that has made them less or more important, or whether they really aren't that important and so we should get rid of them and maybe concentrate on some other stuff. But it allows for transparency within the organisation, which will increase productivity, which will allow us to see what everybody else thinks without having to make people say stuff. Because if 5 people here say that this is really important, this is really important, this is really important, it's really difficult for the 6th and 7th person to say, no, that's not so important. It becomes more difficult. But if we can see what people have felt was important because that's what they've highlighted in the documents, then suddenly we have another point of departure for a discussion. And this is one of the practical things that I mean around how networks can make us smarter, how networks can help us to aggregate how people think and what they think. And I'm not saying that this is a solution to all problems. I'm saying that this is one way for us to start to think about new ways of initiating discussions, of talking about and thinking about what people are doing. So what I'd like you to do immediately after lunch, because we're going to have lunch now at 1 o'clock. So when we come back from lunch, what I'm going to ask you to do, you can start to think about this now, but I'm going to ask you to break down into smaller groups, to take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes to think about how networks and networking as knowledge creators are going to affect education, are going to affect health services, are going to affect NGOs, are going to affect journalism, are going to affect revolutions, are going to affect reconstructing societies, because they will have an effect on all of these things. I'll just give you an example of what I mean before we break for lunch. If we think about education, okay, so the Arab Spring, whatever we want to call it, well, one of the things that happened there, and there's lots of other things that happened there, one of the things that happened there was that networks of people came together in physical spaces and in non-physical spaces, looked at the problems that were there, came with solutions to those problems that were there, came with organizational solutions to the problems that were there, and then affected them. Okay? So we've got a shitload of young people who are used to being able to solve problems together. They're used to being able to group solve problems together. They then go to school. If I give a classroom a task to perform, and then they come back and you say that, oh, I talked with him and her, and together I copied some of the stuff that they had and I added some stuff to me. What's the reaction from your teachers? What do we say that is? If you don't do it yourself, we say it's cheating. So we have an educational system which says that if you don't do this stuff yourself, you're cheating to a group of people who have changed society because they've been able to do things as a collective. So you've got that. That's an immediate clash that we're going to see in the educational system. When these people move into the traditional educational system and they're used to solving problems, and not little problems, they're used to solving problems like how do you get a dictator to die, and they then have people who are saying to them, the way you've solved those problems, great, but you can't do that here. You're not allowed to collaborate with other people here because that's cheating. What's that going to mean for the way the educational system works? And you're people who are going to be putting new structures in place. You're people who are going to be involved in, because your societies are changing right now, you're going to be people who will be involved in, for good or for bad, putting new structures in place. So how would you like to think that networking might be a useful way to start to think about how you could change some of these structures within these different areas. Does that make sense to you as an exercise? Okay, so if we go have lunch, we're back here at 1 o'clock, we'll then divide into